Hi, I'm Kim Blascoe, Senior Director of CAS Professional Services here at CPA.com, and I'm joined by Becky Munson, Mid-Market Practice Leader, Outsourcing Services at Eisner Advisory Group, and Kane Polakoff, Client Advisory Services Practice Leader at Cohn Reznick. Both of you are part of CPA.com's CAS Advisory Council. Thank you so much and welcome.
Thanks, Kim.
Yeah, thanks, Kim.
So it's been a really exciting week for CAS. Earlier this week, the AICPA's Accounting and Review Services Committee clarified a standard on financial statement preparation as part of a client advisory services engagement. So the updates to SAR's financial statement preparation standard specifies that a CPA is not required to apply the ARSC Section 70 standard when the statements are a byproduct of client advisory services engagements. In these instances, practitioners could elect to conduct their CAS services under consulting standards, which is CS Section 100. So the new SARS 27 standard is expected to be published in early April. It will be effective for the preparation of financial statements for periods ending on or after December 15, 2026. Early adopters can utilize the new standard once it's published. So the concept of the preparation of financial statement as a byproduct of CAS engagement has been a key focus of our CAS Advisory Council for some time now, actually since about June of 2023 when I joined, and Kane and Becky have been a big part of those conversations. So Becky, you actually provided us with a really cool quote that had a new era of CAS involved in it. Why do you think this clarification is so important for the profession and the future of the CAS practices?
Yeah, thanks, Kim. It's great to finally get the opportunity to be here talking about a resolution to this conversation. I think if you've been in the CAS space for any length of time as a CPA, you know that there's some tension between the existing wording of standards and the way we deliver work to our clients on a day-to-day basis. CAS is so ingrained and integral into our clients' business that it just doesn't quite fit the way the standards were written when these practices didn't exist. And so finally having a clarification that really helps the CAS practice know how to serve a client with the standards in mind and making sure that we kind of lean into those professional expectations is so exciting. And this change to the standard really does that for us.
Yeah, Kane, and I don't know if you have anything else to add other than, maybe you could provide us some insight into maybe what the involvement the CAS Advisory Council has had in this process and how exciting it is for the council in general to have been part of this process.
Yeah, I think, I'm trying to remember, Kim, it's probably been 4 or 5 years that I think on every single council we've had, and we meet twice a year, this has always been a topic of discussion and debate and understanding. And I think as Becky rightly said, there's been so much thoughts and ideas that have been discussed over the last 4 years, but it's just great to get to the point where we are today. There's been a tremendous amount of input, working with CPA.com and the different practice leaders within the council and the AICPA to kind of get to this point, because it's almost like a road of where CAS has gone too, from an evolution standpoint of we're no longer, just the bookkeepers or doing write-up work. And we'll talk, I think, a little bit more about some of the, the value add. It's not just financial statements as an outcome. It's a byproduct. And I know you'll talk about that. But it's, taking the operational information, the financial information, consulting, and making sure, of course, we have the right standards and the right quality in place to make sure that we deliver a great product. But, I feel good. It's almost like we're all relieved. There's been a lot of activity, even today and yesterday, on the web and social media, just about what this means to us and our profession. And I'm excited to see where it's going to take us next.
Yeah, so let's dive in a little bit deeper and talk about your specific firms. So maybe Becky, talk to us about, as a CAS practice leader, how are you interpreting this for your firm? I know you guys have been on a little bit of a different path than some of the other firms. So maybe you can help people understand a little bit about how your firm is interpreting this.
Yeah, I think it's always a little different when you are in a PE environment. Eisner has a PE stake and was one of the first firms to do so. So we've operated in an alternative practice structure for a number of years now, and that really changed the way the standards kind of fit for our group. But we've had disclosures in our engagement letters for years specifically calling out how we fit into SARS and the way that that applies to the engagements that we have. And clients have had questions of, you're not engaged to prepare a financial statement, but you're giving me financial reporting, and I'm meeting with you every Friday to talk about my business. So clients don't really understand that technical language, and helping clarify that by having standards now that really conform to the deep day-to-day kind of hand-in-glove relationship we have with our clients, I think is going to be so exciting. And it just simplifies the process for our risk team, for the compliance team, and for our group that's leading in engagement, development, and bringing in new clients, right? It's a better standard in terms of talking about how we actually work with our clients and the way that that work plays out versus, like Kane mentioned, write-up work or bookkeeping at this stage.
Yeah, so Kane, I would ask you the same question. Cohn Reznick is a bit different firm. So how do you guys, when you take a step back and look at the new, update to the standard, the clarification to the standard, how are you guys interpreting this at your firm?
Well, it's interesting because as of April 1st, we have now joined the alternative practice structure, which is kind of timing wise. So, as we're now within private equity as of April 1st, and understanding that was a journey that we were going to be going through, and as well as we've had language similar to what Becky said with regards to SARS and internal decisions and what is and how that process is being put together. Now, I know maybe Becky and I are in a different position, but I think a lot of us and a lot of the other leaders we've talked about maybe don't have that. So I think that the good news is there are firms that have gone through that process, and now with the CS Section 100, in play, that we can definitely help and share. I know CPA.com will provide that guidance and leadership too, to how that now impacts the practice and how that drives things forward. So very similar to what Becky said, ironically. So.
Wow, ironically, yeah. So, the other thing, and you guys kind of talked about this a little bit, so maybe you just have a bit more to add, and I'll start with Becky again, or should I start with Kane so he doesn't have to just say just what Becky said? I'll start with Kane.
You were making it easy on me, Kim.
So you guys kind of went into this, but does this affect the way you guys are doing business together, or is it a change? Are you going to have to change some of the things that you are already doing, or had you already made that change? I think Becky more so has made that change. Kane, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've made most of those changes. I know there's some language that we may have to change in our statement of works and MSAs to correlate with the new guidance that's going to be sent out in April. So I think from a legal perspective and how that works from a quality and making sure the standards, and as I understand it, you still can follow those standards if you want, but it's not mandated. So, but it's really just making a tweak into our financials, our statements with a statement of work in MSA, but otherwise it's really business as usual for us.
Yeah, and you did mention I'm going to talk a little bit about, when we wrap up today, about some of the resources that are coming out, and one of the resources we are going to be doing is an FAQ. And it's interesting, you made the comment about, you kind of have options now, right? And there really are options. There's two different paths that you can choose. You can stay under SARS 21, Section 70, and prepare financial statements the way you always have if firms were doing it that way. And that's perfectly fine to continue to do prepared financial statements. Or now you're going to have the option of utilizing what SARS 27 gives you, which is the alternative of using the consulting standards as the means to do your engagements, which I think is where Becky was already living under probably 100%. So, right now, I think that, this kind of just like levels the playing field, allows people to practice in their CAS structures the way they really need to be practicing in order to provide the services that they need to for their clients. So I think that's all great. So let me ask you this question, and I'm going to go to Becky first. What advice do you have for our listeners on how they can manage this change in their practices?
I think it starts obviously with your internal leadership team and some high-level decisions about how you're going to implement a change. If you're going to, like you said, people do have a choice. They can stay under SARS. And some firms may actually make the decision that it makes sense for them to do that. But, figuring out that risk piece. And I also think you really have to look at the way the CAS practice runs, like practically. So much of the standard, we can get into lots of detailed language about the standards, but at the end of the day, what the client thinks you're doing is what matters. And we want to make sure that what we're doing and the way that we're doing it conforms with the client's expectations and how they're looking at us as experts in their in their business. And so I think if you look practically at your CAS practice, it's going to be very clear how you might want to implement this or where it's going to fit and what items you might have in various parts of your groups that still might fall better under SARS, and then kind of splitting that up and coming up with that process. I think the other side of it that we haven't talked about as far as running the practice is it changes the way documentation has to happen, what peer review looks like, how the firm retains certain records and manages certain things. That's very intense under SARS 21. We have to make sure all of these components are there, and those records are not necessarily client beneficial, they're firm records. And by moving to the consulting standards, we don't have as much of a burden to maintain firm level records when the clients really aren't meeting those and it's not beneficial to them. So it should also give us more room in the way we manage engagements, the way we serve clients, the cost of that service, all of those things. It should raise that value to the client significantly inside the practice. And so when you're thinking about implementing all of that stuff is something you should consider and work with your risk officers and your leadership teams to make sure everybody's on the same page about that.
Yeah, really good comments. Okay, Kane, over to you. What advice do you have for our listeners?
Well, I mean, the clarity is there now. So I think with the guidance, it's going to help to develop a roadmap specifically of how we're going to follow, how we're going to execute that. Where when you look at the different CAS leaders that we've talked to, they're all doing it a little bit differently based on interpretation. So I think that it's going to be very clear on those expectations, whether you're going to follow CS Section 100 through the consulting guidelines or through SARS. And you have that option as we shared. I think one thing that'll be helpful is the education, not only for our clients, because there are, when we do have conversations with our clients, they do ask about it, and we can definitely point now to certain guidance, and this is what we follow, and to give that clarity, which will be very helpful. But also is an education within our firms too. When you look at the different groups within our organizations and how that interrelates and those expectations will help clarify that for our internal purposes as well, which I think is a good thing. So we do have a lot of our partners in different groups outside of CAS that we've had discussions about, and now we have clarity. We can actually say you can relate and reference the specific guidelines, and this is what we need to do to be successful going forward. I've had conversations with Chris and Souls from our group of how that's going to relate, but now we have a clear indication of how we're going to move forward with the guidance.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. Both of you mentioned the risk side of your practices and what that means to your firms, what it means to your clients, and what it means to you from a practice perspective. That we're going to have some stuff on that in our FAQs for sure. So I think again, our hope is that we talked to a lot of firms when we were working on this project, and our hope is that all the things that came up as questions as we were talking to firms, we're going to put into that FAQ so people understand. And I'll give an example. One of the questions that firms asked us was, if we do 11 months under the consulting standards, can we do the 12th month under the SARS standards? And the answer is absolutely yes, you can do that. So I think, it'll give a lot of flexibility to the practices, and they can make decisions, and they can switch back and forth if they need to, which is, I think, going to be a beautiful thing for practices as well. So just to give a bit of information, in the coming weeks, CPA.com will release additional resources to help firms determine how this clarification and modernization of standards helps them move forward into business insights, which is one of the things that we've been talking about. And I think a big part of the point about this being an engagement that is part of a client advisory services engagement. And then we're also coming out with the FAQs, the video discussions. We'll have some engagement letter templates to go with all of that. And we'll keep everybody posted on when these resources are available. I think from just a final question to you guys. First, I'm going to thank you for joining me. Both of you, Becky and Kane, I appreciate you being here. But do you have any final comments for the people that are listening to us today.
Yeah, Kim, I think you brought up that the guidance I think you brought up December 2026 is when everything's going into effect. I don't know if you're going to talk a little bit about the early guidance and how that plays into it a little bit, but because I know there's been some confusion with some folks out in the industry. What does that mean? Can we go into it today, or do we have to wait for a period of time? But maybe providing that. I know you've been heavily involved with that, Kim. Maybe sharing that as my last comment. I know the FAQs and everything are being built and put together as we speak, because this is just right hot off the press. But if a firm wants to follow those guidelines next week, can they do that? Is maybe the question.
Yeah, and I think the answer is as soon as that is published, as soon as SARS 27 is published, people will be able to do the early adoption. But I would have to caution people a little bit. I think it would be wise for everyone to just take a breath for just a second and let us get some of the more detailed, like the FAQs and some of the more detailed information. We're pretty close on the first version of the FAQ, so that should come out fairly quickly. And of course, we have a lot more from discussion perspective that's going to hit next week. Town hall, we'll have some conversations about this as well. So we'll see things start to, come out more through some of the press releases. We've had last week was a flurry of press releases, but those were all pretty high levels. So we'll see some of the detail coming out here as we move forward and fairly quickly. And then I think we're going to have another discussion on town hall, maybe April 24th, that goes in a little bit deeper on what's coming out with SARS 27 and what that means to firms. So, Becky, last comments for you?
Yeah, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't thank the committee for all of their hard work, our CAS committee and the standards committee. I think once the determination was made that change was needed and there were kind of sticky points to work through, the CAS committee put a ton of work into that. The standards committee really took it seriously and adopted it quickly. And so I just want to thank everyone who was a part of that. Those efforts have led to a really positive result for CAS in the industry as a whole. And really excited to be a big part of it.
Yeah, and I know, Becky, you worked hard, and Kim, thanks for your leadership too. It was a long journey, as we know, but it's neat to finally get to this place where maybe we don't have to talk about what if anymore. We actually know what we need to do, and I think that it's a good feeling to see that. It's a big win for CAS. I'll just say that. So.
Yeah, absolutely a big win.
I think we're all in agreement on that. Well, thank you again for joining me today. I certainly do appreciate your time as always.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.